Yeah, I'll react to that, sure. Alrighty, men. I've been loving, said this every video. I love learning about progression of ships throughout history, all the little, changes they had to make them better, battleships, frigates, all that stuff. Alright, we are reacting to, my back has been killing me from lifting over rocks looking for crabs. This is not what you think, you sick-minded people. This is for your back and your thigh. Okay, perverts, not what you think. It actually works pretty well. You can turn it up too. Yeah, not people. All right, you guys got me distracted. That's your fault. Okay. Yeah, if you're new to the channel, my name is Connor. I like to learn about history through YouTube recommendations. The original link to the video from Potential History, Crashing into Ships for the Emperor, the story of the Kamikaze. The link to which will be at the top of the description below. Right below that, link to the Discord. Just click on the link, hyperlink. It'll send you right over there. Love to have you. Learn about history. Talk about stuff in main chat. Post funny stuff, memes, all that jazz. Love to have you. Let's do it. Potential History is just a great combination of teaching things I don't know and making me laugh, so I'm excited for
In the 14th century CE, the Emperor of Japan, whose role normally occupied that of a figurehead, restored CE, the Emperor of Japan, whose role normally occupied that In the 14th century CE, the Emperor of Japan, whose role normally occupied that of a figurehead, restored the imperial court's power over the island nation. However, 3 years of poor rule led to an army marching on Kyoto to dethrone the emperor.
If you're not ready to learn, there's a door. Home X down the hall, you're in the wrong class.
A samurai named Kusunoki Masashige, who had been instrumental in the emperor's ascension to power, led the defense despite knowing that he would be outnumbered and under orders to lead his army into a battle that he knew had ended nothing less than utter defeat. It would be several hundred years before another emperor would ascend to rule in Japan. But when it came to pass, Kusunoki's honorable sacrifice would become the heart and soul of a new sort of Japanese warrior never before seen.
Wait a second.
In a war that was beyond anything the 14th century.
Tom Cruise. That movie. Am I right? Samurai. The Last Jedi or something? Not, obviously not. The Last Samurai. Am I wrong? Tom Cruise?
Century samurai warrior never before seen. In a war that was beyond anything the 14th century samurai could possibly imagine. But one in which he, all those years later, would still in many ways have a pivotal role to play.
Oh, geez, sorry.
But first,
Saki shot.
capitalism time. This video is sponsored by Manscaped.
You know, some would say...
Least I can do to help support these channels. These guys do the hard work. I just react to them. Thankful for it. I'm playing through all the ads from now on in the beginning of the videos. Skip ahead if you want, but any of the codes or anything they have, I want to make sure to show.
That nobody is stupid enough to cut your balls while you're shaving. That it's a very delicate procedure and that, you know, no one would be dumb enough to make that mistake while they're doing it.
Surprisingly, I've never made that mistake.
Those people are wrong because I have. However, Manscaped has been gracious enough to create the Lawnmower 3.0, an excellent piece of technology that spent 18 months in
If you guys
development.
find this gross,
That's twice as long
fine,
as it took to
skip
make
ahead,
your
but
dumbass. With
guys, I mean 92% of my audience is guys, so I think I'm okay. But you'd think because of the way the male scrotum is if females have a scrotum, you'd think it'd be very easy to nick and cut, and so it's intimidating, but have you guys ever cut it before? Is this inappropriate? It's a legitimate question. It's a surprisingly resilient part of the body to shaving?
Sarah.
Sorry if that was too far. TMI.
If you want to revolutionize your manscaping, head to the link down below. Get 20% off and free shipping with the code PH20 at manscaped.com.
Alright, capitalism over. The war Japan started with the
That was
United
fast.
States had not gone according to how it was planned in the 1941 Imperial Conference. Despite the efforts of the Japanese armed forces, the sleeping giant had not rolled over and let the rising sun impose its will on Asia, but instead began fighting back, pouring the full force of American industry into the conflict. By mid-1942, the Imperial Navy's striking power had been entirely blunted at Midway. American offensives had penetrated the outer defense ring, creeping further inward. The Navy had suffered subsequent defeat after defeat, and by 1944, the home islands were directly in U.S. sights. American striking ability came from the power of its Navy, and by this stage of the war, Japan's ability to do much of anything to stop it from sailing directly towards the destruction of Japan was diminishing day by day. To put this into perspective, here are some numbers summing up the strike capability of 120 Japanese aircraft going on a conventional attack on a U.S. Navy task force. Sourcing in further information on the numbers below. 60% of the approaching aircraft, on average, would be taken out by the U.S. Combat Air Patrol on the furthest approach. Of the remaining 48 aircraft to actually come within striking distance of the ships, 33% would fall to anti-aircraft guns, leaving 32 planes for a final approach and bombing run. Of these 32, only around 15% would be able to actually score a hit, resulting in around 4 to 5 hits statistically for a loss of 88 planes and pilots. Or in other words, a 73% loss rate for a 4.1% hit probability.
So does this mean that the Japanese kamikaze pilots were technically the first guided missiles?
And these loss numbers have not been static, but going up as the war has gone on. The sheer amount of anti-air capability on US vessels has gone up exponentially. At the Battle of Midway, a USN formation on average would put up 32,000 pounds of steel and munitions per minute in an anti-air capability. This figure would increase consistently to where in 1944, it would be 162,000 pounds per minute. Changes in technology were also adding a bigger risk. Most notable of these was the VT Fuse airburst projectile, which would increase the lethality by a factor of 7, changing the effective weight to 575,000 pounds per minute, or an 11,000% increase in anti-air firepower in 2 years. The bottom line for Japanese air formations in 1944 attacking US Navy task forces is that no matter how you approach, with what equipment or skilled pilots, any approach is tantamount to suicide. And the suicidal nature really became embraced. By the halfway mark...
All right, good point to pause. One of you guys asked a question a while back concerning anti-aircraft ammunition and guns, but the ammunition, and I seem to see a lot of explosions in the sky, even if it wasn't from a plane, from a direct hit. And so I asked, is there some sort of timing mechanism in the ammunition where you can manipulate it to, depending on how high and away you think the aircraft is, to explode at a certain point near the airplane to inflict damage from shrapnel into the airplane. And so not only that, so you clearly had to shoot sort of ahead of where you thought the target was going, not hit scan, you know.
Mark of 1944, multiple unit commanders of Japanese air wings around the same time came up with basically the same idea. If death is certain, let's inflict as much damage on the enemy as possible before it comes. And the idea was institutionalized with the start of the American invasion of the Philippines by Vice Admiral Onishi Takajiro, who ran a test attack on October 25th, 1944, with a group of volunteers from the 201st Air Group. Their orders were simple. They were to fly planes packed with explosives into American ships to hold up the American carriers for a week to hopefully buy him time to bolster his defense against the giant tide that was coming against him. And the results seemed to immediately speak for themselves, with the carrier St. Lo sunk and 5 other ships damaged. Encouraged by these results, more attacks were ordered for these new special attack units that to the Japanese seemed as though they could possibly have the power to change the war's fortune.
They also had kamikaze submarines with, you know, a, hitched torpedo on it that wasn't for sending the torpedo, but just exploding on impact of the entire submarine.
And if not at least just a little bit less against them. U.S. forces were completely taken aback by this change in tactics. And to this day, the kamikazes remain this sort of mystified element of the war that has been very difficult for Westerners to get their heads around. But let me show you some more super cool statistics for nerds to begin explaining this whole thing. To achieve the same 5 hits as a conventional attack, only 35 kamikaze would be needed, with accounts taken for the combat air patrol and anti-aircraft defenses. This would of course be with a loss rate at 100%, but numerically, it is significantly fewer losses than those of a conventional attack. Kamikazes also have many advantages that a conventional attack force simply cannot due to its inherent nature, such as a larger payload from a plane
I bet you that plane,
or simply cannot due to its inherent.
it seemed to be going at a shallow opposite of steep. At not, because if it's too steep of an angle, it's just going to go right into the water. But this doesn't seem to achieve a direct hit, but I think it's going at an angle where I'm sure if the explosion at the water didn't affect it, it's the explosion and the plane then skipped into the boat, which it seemed to have done.
Which is a larger payload from a plane packed with explosives and fuel, meaning those 5 hits will cause a lot more damage. Less skill being needed to run into a ship rather than hit it with a bomb, meaning inexperienced pilots will be able to be recruited into the special attack forces and still be very lethal with very little training time. The ability of any type of aircraft, even those terribly outdated and training models, to be able to be used very effectively, and there are even savings in fuel, as these will of course be one-way trips. To put it bluntly, if you are Japan, the best thing to do at this point in the war would be to surrender and end it, because there's no way that you can possibly come out victorious. But if you utterly refuse to acknowledge that fact, and you're hampered by a lack of skilled pilots, fuel, and airplanes, and need the most damage possible for an attack that is basically a suicide attack whether you intend it to be or not, I guess you could pick worse things. Kamikaze tactics, at least in the West, are often spoken about as being something utterly insane with no rationale behind it. But when you look at them very objectively and callously,
in a way, it's sort of patriotic.
It's really bitterly ironic that really the opposite ends up being true. At least in the beginning. Part of the reason these attacks were so successful when they first began was that they were completely unexpected and a new thing the US air defense had to figure out. And as they were so deadly when successful, they began to be figured out pretty quick, and kamikaze effectiveness declined sharply as the months went on.
It's either
this, however, did
brainwashed or
not deter
patriotic.
the Japanese from continuing with them, with suicide attacks becoming almost the norm in the waters around Okinawa, and thousands of suicide attacks from planes and many other platforms being prepared.
I wonder if they, sorry so much pausing, if they aimed more for the command center of the aircraft carrier or battleship or whatnot, or for the deck, so that, you know, they just had no chance of flying more planes and maybe causing more likelihood to sink. Sorry, pausing so much.
Thousands of suicide attacks from planes and many other platforms being prepared for the defense of the home islands. There is this mysticism when it comes to the pilots, though. You hear about every explanation for why they went along with this. Everything from being forced to being actively suicidal and yearning for death. And although we are talking about thousands of people here, and you don't want to paint with too broad of a brush, neither of those things are really uniquely the case. However, think back to the beginning of this video, with Kusunoki Masashige and his obedience to the command of his superior. This philosophy and sense of commitment was a large part of Bushido culture and ideals, which although the time of the samurai had passed, many Japanese still practiced and tried to live by, especially in the military. To do your duty and forfeit your life if it's required and ordered of you by those above you for the needs of the many. Pilots were not insane or suicidal. Many were young students with promising lives ahead of them. They were often told that they'd be worshipped as gods for their sacrifice, being spoken of as a privilege. Which leads into the more forceful side of this that also definitely existed, and the massive amount of peer and cultural pressure from the exact same vessels of honor, duty to the nation, and cultural expectation that just as they could be a source of personal duty, could easily be forced upon you and used to coerce and shame you into submission and going along with this. As a Westerner speaking to a widely Western audience, I'm going to leave it there and encourage you to look into the societal factors at play that
I'll let him play out the conclusion, but I saw another video about kamikazes and how there were some instances of not being able to, maybe not enough fuel to make it, or not being able to really have a good shot at it, which kind of is strange because, your whole point is to try and dive in and die and hit a plane. But there was one instance where one kamikaze pilot came back like 8 or 9 times, and I think they just eventually executed him because he was like, oh yeah, you wouldn't believe it, I was gonna dive in and kill myself for Japan, and then this thing happened. 7 times later. Okay, I think they executed him.
led into how individual pilots thought and went along with this, because it's very interesting. But, although I have been reading into this a lot for the research for this video, there still are wide cultural differences that I'm simply not going to be able to fully explain, especially in a video of this length. But I hope this does kind of demystify some of the common lore surrounding kamikazes and how they're often discussed in the West. So this is definitely a shorter video. It's been a long time since I've done one of those. Thank you to patrons and Manscaped.
Thanks for making the video. Awesome channel, Potential History. How am I not subscribed? What? I should have been. Okay, guys. Another video soon. I'm going to do one more today, I think, actually. So, see you next time.